Taoiseach, 12 years ago I visited the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. I was struck by how packed it was. Over 100,000 people living in closely cramped quarters in less than 1.4 square kilometres. Many streets are so small you can't even fit a coffin down them. But today, Taoiseach, much of Jabalia, a refugee camp, lies in ruins because Israel targeted it for bombardment. I visited a hospital in Gaza, Taoiseach. Even then, back in 2011, they were running out of surgical gloves and basic medicines because of Israel's blockade. Today, they are being forced to operate on hospital floors without anaesthetic and are on the verge of running out of fuel. Running out of fuel means the electricity going off and death for people in ICU, for babies in incubators. I met a 12-year-old girl who hadn't seen her father since she was 4 months old. He was one of about 6,000 political prisoners being held by Israel, many without charge or trial, and hundreds of them children. There are now thousands and thousands of children in Gaza who will never see their parents again. Over 4,000 children themselves have been killed. Israel is committing war crimes, Taoiseach, with the support of the US government and much of the EU. They are bombing hospitals and ambulances. They are bombing residential areas with the biggest bombs designed to inflict maximum damage. They are bombing convoys of refugees they ordered to flee south for safety. They're laying siege to 2.3 million people, trying to starve them out by blockading food and water. They're bombing fishing boats to stop people from getting around the siege and feeding themselves. They are committing the crime of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Articles 6, 7 and 8 of the Rome Statute. They are committing these crimes openly and brazenly, repeatedly declaring their intention to do so in the world's media. Yesterday, the Taoiseach said it may well be the case that war crimes have been committed. That is where the International Criminal Court comes in, but there has to be a proper investigation. Taoiseach, will the Irish Government make a referral to the International Criminal Court under Article 14 of the Rome Statute so that there can be such an investigation? Israel is facing growing isolation internationally, Taoiseach. Bolivia has cut all diplomatic ties with Israel. Chile and Colombia have recalled their ambassadors. They were joined yesterday by South Africa and Chad. If Ireland took that step as a European country, if we expelled the Israeli ambassador, it would have an impact globally. It would send a clear signal that when Ursula von der Leyen gave the green light to Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza, she was not speaking for all Europeans. It would further isolate and put pressure on Israel to stop. It would demonstrate real solidarity with the Palestinian people. So 2 questions, Taoiseach. Will the government make a referral to the International Criminal Court so there can be an investigation, and will you expel the Israeli ambassador?
Taoiseach, please.
The position on this has been very clear. There should be a humanitarian ceasefire immediately so that aid can go into Gaza and EU and other citizens can leave. Hamas should free all of the hostages it's holding without any conditions and should lay down its arms because it is a terrorist organisation. And we need a new peace initiative in the Middle East, desperately so. The situation in Gaza is critical. The high number of civilian casualties is deeply shocking, particularly the numbers of children, journalists and also UN and other aid workers who have been killed. The protection of civilians and de-escalation is a priority. A humanitarian ceasefire is required immediately, and the level of aid passing into Gaza needs to be accelerated as a matter of urgency. We continue to engage with EU and regional partners to increase aid allowed into Gaza, and the government is in regular contact with regional foreign ministers and leaders. The Taoiseach has announced 13 million in humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, with 10 million for UNRWA and 3 million for Oireachtas. Ireland condemns outright the attack by Hamas and affirms Israel's right to defend itself, but this must be in line with international humanitarian law and in a proportionate manner, and this has not been the case. A distinction has to be made between Hamas and civilians in Gaza, and targeting civilian infrastructure is not acceptable, and collective punishment is a breach of international humanitarian law in our view. De-escalation and protection of civilians must be our first priority. In relation to the role of the International Criminal Court, attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure is a breach of international humanitarian law, as I said. All potential violations of international humanitarian law should be investigated. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan, confirmed the court has jurisdiction over the situation in occupied territory and by Palestinian nationals outside it, so we don't need to make a referral for an investigation to take place. In relation to the issue of the ambassador, Deputy, I don't believe it would be the right thing to expel the ambassador from Israel. For exactly the same reasons as we didn't expel the Russian ambassador in relation to Ukraine, we need to be able to engage at some level. There are around 40 Irish citizens being held in Gaza. We want them to be able to leave. Look, Deputy, there's also a young Irish-Israeli girl who may well be being held in Gaza as a hostage of Hamas as well. So let's not just be one-sided about this. Our priority, no matter who's holding them, is them being able to get out and get to safety. And that means that we need to be able to engage with the Israeli government and the Israeli ambassador. We also, at some point, want to be able to talk about peace and reconciliation and reconstruction. And that may seem ridiculous now, but we have to keep that hope alive. And while expelling the ambassador might make us feel better for a day or two, it might be a story in the international news for a day or two, it wouldn't actually have an impact on Israel's policy, not for a second. You're a bit naive if you actually think that. It wouldn't cause them to change course. And secondly, it would hamper our efforts to get the hostages out, to get the citizens out, and also to potentially have some sort of role in future peace building and peacemaking in the area.
Deputy Murphy.
Make sure that she doesn't go back home until all people come home safe.
Deputy Murphy.
Thanks, Ken Corla. Taoiseach, you've acknowledged that there needs to be an investigation by the International Criminal Court. It's true that the prosecutor has said that they have authority. What that's referring to is the fact that Israel is not a signatory to the Statute of Rome, and therefore is saying we're not applicable. And the prosecutor is saying no, things that are committed in Gaza can be covered. But there does need to be a referral in order for a prosecution and investigation to take place. You have the power to make that happen. Will the government make a referral under Article 14 so that there is an investigation by the International Criminal Court? Taoiseach says we can't expel the Israeli ambassador because we need to have diplomatic relations to try and get the Irish citizens out. But Taoiseach, we have those relations right now. We have the Israeli ambassador on the Irish media every day telling lies, covering up for war crimes, and that is not happening. Isn't it true, Taoiseach, that Irish citizens, together with Brazilian citizens, are effectively being held hostage by the Israeli regime in Gaza? That while other countries' citizens have been allowed to leave, the US, Germany, Britain, Irish and Brazilians have not been allowed to leave by Israel.
Thank you.
And that those countries whose citizens are allowed to leave are those who voted in line with Israel against a ceasefire, and that effectively Irish and Brazilian citizens are being punished by Israel for our vote in favour of a ceasefire at the UN. The best thing for Irish citizens in Gaza and everyone else is for the bombing and the assault to stop, and the more pressure on Israel, the more isolation of Israel, the more pressure put on Israel to do precisely that. The best thing we can do precisely is to expel the ambassador and to send a signal to them and to the whole world.
Taoiseach, please.
Deputy, our advice and our understanding is that we don't need to make a referral for an investigation to take place, and the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has said that they believe jurisdiction applies to the occupied territories, but I'll seek further information and advice on that. There are roughly 8,000 EU and foreign nationals in Gaza. Only a handful have been allowed to leave so far. Only about 20% of EU citizens have been allowed to leave so far, and we've been given no indication that Ireland is somehow being penalised for the stance we're taking in our call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. But we will not change our position on that, no matter what.